I found another interesting topic to talk about, and the basis of it is this article. It says, stop judging games by their sales figures. And if you read about what Harada is talking about, I think that he is making a point that's often misunderstood. He is not saying sales don't matter. He's basically saying sales shouldn't be the only lens through which we evaluate games or the people who make them. Thing is, the problem is that here are really two different questions. First one being, was the game commercially successful? And second one being, was the game creatively or artistically successful? And while these two questions are related, they are not the same. Take Dark Souls for example. It wasn't an instant blockbuster on the level of today's biggest releases. It did build an audience over time, however, established a new subgenre, influenced countless developers, and ultimately helped pave the way for Elden Ring, which became a massive commercial hit. So if you would have judged the team solely on early sales, you might never have gotten Elden Ring. On the other hand, Harada's statement can also be taken too far. For example, for publishers, investors, and studio executives, sales absolutely matter. Games cost enormous amounts of money to make. And if a game costs, let's say, 20 million and sells 5 million copies, that's likely a huge success. However, if the game costs 300 million and sells 5 million copies, that could actually be disappointing. And those numbers determine whether a studio survives, whether developers keep their jobs, and whether a sequel gets funded. So if you are going to ignore commercial performance, that's not really realistic. Now, where I think Harada is most correct is when people use sales as a shortcut for quality. For example, if you pick a random game and that game sold 20 million copies, automatically it should be objectively better, but that logic doesn't hold up. There are many reasons why a game can be popular. For example, stronger marketing, brand recognition, releasing at the right time, platform exclusivity, accessibility, multiplayer appeal, for example, and obviously the most important one, word of mouth. I mean, obviously quality certainly helps, but it's only one ingredient. And as an example, there are plenty of fantastic games in my opinion that sold modestly, stuff like Prey, Titanfall 2, and Okami for example. And you could never say that any of the games that I've listed were failures from a design perspective just because they didn't become mega hits. At the same time, we have hugely successful games that receive plenty of criticism but continue to sell because they are attached to an established franchise or have exceptional marketing. So what should we use instead? Well, it's rather simple when you think about it. This is a multivariable thing, so you cannot use one metric, and the different metrics will answer different questions. For example, if you're analyzing commercial success, you'll probably check sales, revenue, or profit. When it comes to player reception, you have user reviews, retention, recommendation rates, stuff like that. If you are interested in critical success, well, you go for reviews, awards, industry recognition. And as for creative impact, you might ask questions like, did the game introduce new mechanics? Did other developers copy that? Or is the game still discussed years later? And final metric that you could use is obviously studio success. As in, did the project improve the team's skills, or did it establish tech that benefits future games? And I think last point is what Harada is really getting at. One thing, however, that I would push back on is Harada's comment that people who judge by sales have never actually developed games. That's a bit dismissive because consumers don't need development experience to discuss whether a game justified its budget or whether a publisher made a sound business decision, because those are legitimate conversations too. However, some of you might say, yeah, it's all nice and fine, but if people don't see the potential of the game and just look at sales numbers, which again, they should because you don't have an infinite supply of money to invest into future projects, then what can you do? And I think this is the uncomfortable reality of game industry. You cannot expect publishers to fund potential forever. And this is where the developer perspective and the business perspective will naturally diverge. I mean, when you think about it, Harada is speaking like someone who spent decades making games. From that perspective, you can see progress that isn't obvious from the outside. Maybe your AI system is vastly improved and your pipeline is better, and your writers are finding their voice, or your combat designers finally nailed something special. And those are investments that may not pay off until the next game. But if you're a publisher, you have to ask questions. For example, can we afford to wait for the payout? And sometimes the answer is simply no. To illustrate things a bit better, let's take a hypothetical studio. Game A loses 30 million, Game B loses 20 million but is better reviewed, and then Game C might finally become the breakthrough. So if you're a publisher that's already down 50 million, would you gamble another 100 million? I mean, maybe, but only if you genuinely believe Game C has a realistic chance of succeeding. Otherwise, you're risking the entire company. And that's why publishers rely on sales. But they are one of the few objective indicators available. So where I think people go wrong is assuming poor sales always mean a poor game. You have many reasons why games fail. And it has nothing to do with the game itself. It could be that you launched at a terrible time. Maybe your marketing is ineffective. Maybe you released it on the wrong platform. Or maybe you priced it poorly. Again, similar to launching at a terrible time, maybe the game was overshadowed by bigger release. Or simply, you didn't find the audience until years later. And then on the other hand, a game can sell incredibly well because it's part of an established franchise, just like I said before, even if it's widely considered a weaker entry. A good example that I would single out here is Cyberpunk 2077. Its launch was heavily criticized, yet it sold extremely well because of the anticipation surrounding it. And if you judged it only by sales, you'd conclude everything was fine. And in reality, CDPR spent years rebuilding trust through updates and the Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty expansion. So sales alone didn't capture the whole picture. Ultimately, I think Harada is arguing against reductionism, reducing a game's entire value to a spreadsheet. But if he is arguing that publishers shouldn't care much about sales, I don't think that's actually realistic. The harsh truth is that potential is valuable only if someone can afford to invest in it. Every great studio eventually has to prove that its creative growth translates into commercial sustainability. Otherwise, even talented teams can run out of runway. And that's not because their work lacked merit. It's because game development is extraordinarily expensive and no publisher has unlimited resources. It's a harsh reality, but reality nonetheless. And that's basically my take on this news. Thanks very much for watching, and as always, like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. And that's it from me, until the next one.